This is a segment on old media and new media and how the world has changed in our business and what economic drivers have made that the new reality. Before we start, I thought we'd go around our panel. We have a really top flight panel here, and I'll give you a very brief thumbnail of who they are and how they came to this table. And I'm told that we should be very careful about speaking into the mic without doing that.
Okay, hopefully without shattering your eardrums. I'm Ann Galloway from V2 Digger, and thank you all for coming today and listening to us talk about news. I run a statewide news website based here in Montpelier. We got our start at the State House, and we now have 17 people in the newsroom, and we cover a variety of issues around the state. We have a reporter in Burlington and in southern Vermont, and I'll pass this on to everybody else.
Good morning, I'm Neal Goswami with WCAX. Started my journalism career at the Bennington Banner, then went to the Vermont Press Bureau and did print for 12 years before entering Stewart's TV territory, and he's been very kind helping me along, so I appreciate that. It's a strange new world, but very much doing the same thing I did in print.
I wrote kind of a long introduction. Much like Anne over here, Pamela Paulson and I were both reporters at a struggling newspaper when we decided to start 7 Days in 1995. There was no market research involved. We just wrote about what we liked. Arts, people, food, humor, trends, quirky stuff like why Al's French fries is spelled F-R-Y-S. We figured our readers shared our interests, and like us, they were cultural consumers who were willing to travel for food, events, and shows. The company has grown over the past 23 years by diversifying within its niche, developing publications that target foodies, parents, students, French-Canadian tourists. We do events for techies, first-time homebuyers, singles, restaurants. In other words, we hustle. The paper's free to readers. The advertising that gets sold every week funds our journalism. That means we're doing a burger week in 2 weeks. But this past session, we had a political team of 5, 3 writers and 2 editors, covering what goes on here. All of us are committed to creating a great, varied read with interesting and sometimes long stories and compelling graphics. We still believe in the serendipity of print. The readers come to us for one thing and discover they're interested in another.
David?
Dave Graham, I was a reporter here in the Associated Press, based in Montpelier, for a little more than 30 years, and of course the AP, completely unbiased. The only bias I would ever confess to was I was somewhat in favor of secession, because I always wanted to be a foreign correspondent for the AP, but I never wanted to leave Vermont. And secession obviously would solve that problem. But left the AP in early 17, and since then I've worked part-time at VT Digger, and now part-time since February as the host of the Dave Graham Show on WDEV FM and AM, 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays, having a lot of fun with that. In fact, I was broadcasting from here this morning, just out in the hallway there, and thank those of you who were able to join me as my guests on the program. You can listen to the podcast later at WDEVradio.com, and so that's our story.
And my name is Pete Hirschfeld. I'm a reporter for Vermont Public Radio, where I cover State House goings-on and politics during campaign season. I started out at the Times-Argus and Rutland Herald, actually covering sports there, just kind of worked my way up, and made the transition to public radio about 4 years ago.
Thanks. We want to explain and illuminate, perhaps, we hope, a little bit about the news business and how the news business has changed, and what implications this may have for our state and for our country. Let me pick up on something that Paula indicated. I wrote a few pieces for the predecessor of 7 Days, the Vermont Vanguard Press, which in the 70s and 80s struggled mightily to stay in business. Today, its new iteration is chock full of advertising. It is the most widely circulated newspaper in our state, I believe, and seems to be doing super well. How is that possible? What economic model did you embrace that has made your paper thrive while so many daily newspapers have struggled to survive?
Well, it is the same economic model of the Vanguard, with lots of different factors thrown in. I mean, the technology, back in the Vanguard, I worked at the Vanguard too, and we had this giant typesetter that had its own room and its own, air conditioning system, and we were lucky that when we started, a lot of the technology was changing in the dark room, so we benefited economically from some of those things. But the model is, in the print product, the paper is as big as we sell ads to support it. And then, all these other things I mentioned, the ways that we've diversified have helped tremendously. But, I could bore you to tears. But
well, have you thrived because of the decline of daily papers or in spite?
The paragraph I left out was, in the mid-2000s is when we really started investing in news. And when the recession hit and we saw the free press shrinking dramatically, we realized we could help fill that void. Before that, we were the alternative. So we were the alternative to something, and that was really the free press. Now we feel like we're in the mainstream in some ways in Vermont. But I just think the landscape has shifted, and you're seeing that today. But the economic model for us is still selling advertising to support what we do. And I didn't know if we were going to talk about for-profit versus non-profit, but
we will in just a minute. I'm curious. Anne Galloway founded Vermont Digger during when George W. Bush was president. There was no Digger. And it was born of sort of your personal calamity after your layoff at the Rutland Herald. And look what came of it. How have you thrived in this new era? What economic model has made it possible for you?
When I was laid off as Sunday editor of the Rutland Herald and Times-Argus, and I have to say two of my former colleagues are here. I think Pete Hirschfeld and Neal Goswami and Neal worked for the Times-Argus at one point or another. When the paper had some major issues with advertising in December of 2008, it seemed pretty clear to me. We had a hole in the Sunday paper for advertising. It was just there was no advertising in the paper, so we were filling it with these long New York Times thumbsuckers, on a variety of issues on Sundays through the end of that year. And it seemed pretty clear to me. It was pretty clear to me that the commercial model for daily newspapers wasn't working at that time. And in early 2009, when I was laid off with 15 people at the time, and then later it became 20 people that year who were laid off, I realized that if I wanted to stay in journalism, I had to find a different way of moving forward with the business model. And that's when I started looking around the country at models like Texas Tribune and ProPublica and the New Haven Independent, and I discovered this small band of pioneers out there who were using really an NPR affiliate model like BPR has, where you're basically offering memberships, you're taking donations as a nonprofit, and then you're also supporting the news with some underwriting and grants. And because I didn't have any money and I didn't know anybody with money who could, float a newspaper business, there's a lot of money in print and there's a lot of money in printing and distribution. And I knew I could never afford to do something like that, but because WordPress had just come out with a sort of customizable website platform, I thought, well, maybe we could use that and we could get started and see if we could support journalism through through donations, grants, and some underwriting. And, I have to say that in the beginning, it took a while to get the proof of concept going. First of all, online, you got to develop an audience, and that took time. I didn't have any reporters. I paid a few freelancers. It took about 5 years to really even get to a point where people knew that we were doing what we were doing, which was covering the State House in a very serious way. And then in 2014, 2015, we started to get some traction. And our growth has really been fueled in part by a recognition that there's a real need in our community for daily, iterative news on subjects people really care about and on communities that need attention. So we've really focused on a lot of investigative reporting and in-depth reporting on major issues that the mainstream press, especially the Times-Argus, the Rutland Herald, and the Burlington Free Press, had abandoned. There was no reporting of any note on EB5 until we started breaking stories in 2014. The scandal in Coventry where a woman had allegedly stolen $1.4 million from taxpayers had not really been fully explored until we went in there and took a hard look at it. And, I think that to Paul Heinz's point in the earlier panel, some healthy competition is a really good thing. And so you'll see that in response to some of the news that we're doing, 7 Days is also doing more in-depth reporting, DPR is doing more of that, and that's all good for Vermont. The hard part is that none of us have really figured out where, I don't believe, maybe Paula has a different opinion about this, but I'm not sure any of us have really figured out how in the long run the migration of readers to the web and the ability of all of us to make money on the web, we're all still kind of working on that because Google and Facebook own 85% of the advertising market nationwide. And I can tell you, having gone to a number of underwriting meetings myself, underwriting is the nonprofit version of advertising, that people here, local companies are using Facebook and Google instead of advertising with local media companies. And this is starting to affect broadcast as well. So if we want a healthy press, I'm sorry, I'm using that term loosely, broadcast, online journalism, we have to support it not only with membership donations, but we need folks in the business community to understand that this is really vital to our democracy. And so we don't have it figured out yet, is my short answer with the long exposition there.
As politicians too, using Facebook instead of advertising with us, those of us who write about them.
Yeah, Phil, I still don't have an ad from Phil Scott. I've been working it. And he's spending $20,000 on Facebook. What gives? Does he support local business or what? Thank you.
Neal, I know you're new to the TV local news world, but how's business?
How is business? Here we go. Business is decent, I would say, although I don't see the numbers. I don't know if you do at your shop, Stewart, but that's above my pay grade. The mechanics of a news story are the same wherever you are, whether you're at BT Digger, on the radio, print reporter. There's something going on, and you go out to figure out why it's happening and who's involved, or you get a little nugget of information and you want to know more about that, and you go find the people who know it, and you turn it around into something that hopefully people want to read, listen to, or watch. What I have found in my sort of transition from print to television is that how you tell those stories is extremely different. And I can't tell you how many times in my first few months I was admonished for writing like a print reporter in television. And I didn't really get the concept and I don't know that I still do, but writing for print is extremely different than writing for television. I used to take pride in the craft of writing, and that is something you can do in print. In television, you have to condense it and distill it so much that you often feel like you're not really saying much at all. And the audiences are very different, as you know. Since I moved to television, I've become very popular with the retired set at the grocery store. Not so much with the younger crowd. They don't know who I am and couldn't care less. So it's
you take the bitter with the sweet.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. I'm learning a lot about the differences between mediums and how you tell stories to different groups of people and how they want to consume their news.
Let's get our two radio representatives to weigh in on the business model. How's business? What are your struggles?
I would say at WDEV, business is good. I've been, I used to be somebody who didn't really have a lot of time. I didn't think for advertising. But since moving to DEV, not only do I realize that where I get my pay, but I also realize that it's a key reflection, actually, of the station's ties with the community. And DEV, I got to say, is a very unique organization. There aren't many stations around the nation, actually, that remain locally owned and locally operated with such a strong local flavor. And I've actually come to love hearing those guys talk about take routes 14, 15, and 16 to Hardwick, it's a lot of fun. And there's a real connectedness, a connected feeling there. And of course, DEV is in the throes of an ownership change. Steve Cormier is coming in as the new general manager. He's working on acquiring the station from Ken Squire. The station has been in the Squire family since it was the first radio station in Vermont in 1931. So that's a huge change. But there also is a lot of continuity in the sense that Steve is saying very much that he wants to keep it a local operation and keep that flavor going. So I hope it has a strong future.
VPR is a thriving organization, and it's one of the reasons it's such a great place to work right now.
Get closer.
All right. But, it's interesting for people that have been in the news business and watched the rise of the internet and the resulting death of some organizations, not all obviously. It's instilled a really, I think, healthy sense of paranoia in anybody who lives in our time right now. And we're in the midst of some real fundamental shakeups in terms of the way people receive our product in radio. In 2008, 94% of 18 to 35-year-olds had a terrestrial radio device in their home. Now it's 50%. So you see this dramatic reshaping of the way young people especially are consuming broadcast media. And at VPR, one of the things the people who are running that place spend most of their time thinking about is how can we make sure that our content and our delivery mechanisms are translating with the people that we're going to need to reach if we don't want to become irrelevant when our current target demo isn't around anymore.
The common theme in all of this is that the internet has changed our world. It's made Ann's enterprise possible. And there are many new platforms available to all of us. New platforms mean on-demand news. We have iPad newscasts, blog postings on website, 24/7 availability on the internet. No deadlines, because the deadlines right now were 5 minutes ago. What impact has this had on your journalism quality? Has it been a struggle to adapt?
I would say for me, when I started, Twitter was just sort of coming out. People didn't really know what the hell to use Twitter for. And some people still probably don't. And I wonder sometimes about its purpose and use myself. But there are really no deadlines anymore except for the 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock news. You have to have a work product done by then for you, and there is no deadline. It's when the story is written and when it's edited and when it's, you hit the send button to launch it. But I think we're all learning on the fly how to deal with this sort of appetite of news that people have. And there's no sitting on a scoop anymore because it's probably not going to last very long. You kind of go to Twitter, go to Facebook, go to the web and put your story up and as much information as you can because you don't have the luxury of waiting till an 11 p.m. print deadline and then the big story coming out in the morning paper anymore. It's just, that's not the world we live in anymore. So everything's faster, faster, faster.
Yeah, we struggle with the schizophrenia of the web versus the magazine. Some people call the paper a magazine, which I don't correct them. That's what it feels like we're creating every week. So it's similar, but it's a weekly product instead of daily. But the amount of editing and proofreading that we put into the print product, we try to do the same online, but it's just too fast. I mean, we do edit everything. It's not, and we're trying not to write it as we go, like I've heard some newspapers do. But it's really challenging.
I think the shifting landscape has to some extent changed the metrics by which some media entities rate their success. And I think, there was a time when reach was the thing, right? How many households are you getting your newspaper into? How many passive listeners is your radio or television station reaching on any given hour? And I think now people are becoming more and more interested in what their, quote, engagement is with the audience that they are reaching. So you can have somebody click on your story, but if they read 2 words and that's it, and they send it back into the bowels of the internet and never care about it again, that's one thing. What if they're not just reading a piece of journalism, but also sharing it with their social networks, commenting on it, giving it a new life that its creator wouldn't alone be able to give it. And so at VPR at least, that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, is not just how can we get this piece of journalism to people, but make it appeal to them in a way that makes them want to engage with that and give it a life beyond what we give it.
I think what we're going to see here, and are already seeing to a large degree, is improvement in quality, because the way you're going to reach people and the way you're going to get them to share the information with their friends online, and the way you're going to really make an impact like that is just by producing higher quality stuff all the time. And I was talking to someone earlier today on my radio program who was around the state, covering the State House in the 60s and 70s, and talked about having this record of once having produced 14 stories in a day. And if you're producing 14 stories in a day, I'm sorry, but a human being, none of them is going to be very good. They're not going to be very. I mean, some of them might have some exciting news in them or whatever, but they're just not. You're not going to be able to follow them to the degree you want to. So I think these days, what we're really coming to now is that we all need, in whatever type of media we're working, to refocus ourselves on high quality stuff. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that from VPR, from 7 Days, and from Digger. I really think that maybe the volume isn't as high as it used to be in terms of the amounts of things produced, but certainly the quality is improving.
I think part of the issue is that there are rewards for getting out there first, and they may seem intangible to readers, but for publishers, the reward is you get picked up by Google News. You get picked up by, if you're the first on Facebook with a story that's breaking, you're going to get more readers to that story. And there are a lot of people who talk about the attention economy, and that's what this is about. It's sort of racing to the finish line and making sure you have your piece out first so that people see it. Now, there are different strategies for doing this, and some people, like at Digger, we take an AP approach. We might break a story with 2 or 3 paragraphs and then come back and give you updates as we're reporting. So we'll do write-throughs until the story is finished. So the final update might not be done until 10 or 11 at night, but we want you to know that this is happening and that you should check back because there's going to be more to the story. But we want to get out there first so that we get ahead of the pack. And that's what's driving the news cycle. I'm not saying it's good, but it's something that we all pay attention to because it has an impact on the bottom line. The amount of traffic or readership that we get on the site has an impact on underwriting and the ability to deliver impressions to businesses that want to promote their companies on their website. So that's why you're seeing this trend. There's a reason, a business reason for it.
I want to share a little anecdote about how the business model has changed. I walked into the WCAX bureau this morning, and there's a web guy that shares the office with me, and I walk in and he says, "Hey, congratulations, we won the war yesterday." And my first question was, what war are we engaged in? And he said, the Facebook war. We won the Facebook war. And I didn't know what in the world he's talking about, but apparently all of our media things are ranked by Facebook every day about who has the most clicks and engagements and everything else. Now think back to yesterday in the fire hose of information and news that you all experienced, and try to guess what you think this war was won with. It was about a 4-sentence story about the Notch Road closing. That's what won the war. And so, I mean, this is the world we operate in now, folks. And part of it is all on you because you're clicking it. And so, take that to heart for what it's worth. But the Notch Road closing won the war.
I knew we should have pumped a brief out about that.
Now you've learned something. Thinking beyond Vermont, because the last panel talked a lot about real news and fake news, the failing New York Times, which has seen an uptick in subscribers, I might add. What risk is there, do you think, to our state and to our country by gravitating toward news outlets that we agree with, that appear to reflect our political persuasion, the news we prefer? Is that a risk?
Without a doubt. I mean, if you only read sources you agree with, you're pretty sheltered. You're not engaging the full capacity of your mind to explore other points of view. And if you only reinforce what you already believe and know, you're leaving a lot of potential on the table there.
I've had readers actually complain about showing multiple points of view in a story. They only want to hear one point of view. And our democracy can't survive with that kind of thinking.
I was really fascinated by the conversation that was happening in the panel before. People talking about fake news, people talking about the president, calling out the press as the enemy of the people. And of course, for us in this industry, that's a frightening thing to hear. What I wonder about is why that claim has so much resonance with so many people in this country, right? It's not just that the president is saying this, it's that sentiment hits home in a very real way with a lot of people who frankly feel the way he does, that the press is missing the mark, that we're not serving their needs. And I don't know whether that's something we can control or not, but I think it's a question us as reporters, us as news organizations ought to spend some time marinating over at least, because maybe there are ways in which we're delivering our content in a way that is not acknowledging the reality of people that we don't spend a lot of time around or with. And so, when I'm doing a story at Vermont Public Radio, I'm trying to think, what would the guys who I talk to every morning at LBJ's in Worcester when I get my coffee think of this story? Would they write it off as lefty garbage, which is what they think everything on NPR is, make no mistake. Or would I be telling that story in a way that made them think, maybe, maybe this outlet is okay. So, I don't know that the press should spend time bending over backwards or altering its narratives in a way that seeks the approval of everybody, but it's just something that I spend time thinking about.
But we're in an age of information overload. It's not possible to read it all, to watch it all. Not even close. My mother, don't share this with her, but she must get 200 cable channels. But I swear she only watches one. And you know what that one is. Huffington Post, MSNBC, Fox News Channel, they have persuasions. How do we become more sophisticated? What, as educated consumers, should we force ourselves to watch a diverse handful? Or how do we become more sophisticated, do you think?
I do think that there is a need to occasionally check out the different sources of news to find out what their narratives are and how they're thinking about things, because particularly for us in the media, we may have our own understanding of how this particular story is working or how this particular fact pattern is breaking down. But if you tune in one of your competitors or you tune in, one of the national networks that you don't normally tune in, you might actually come up with an idea or an approach to the story and say to yourself, gee whiz, I might want to think about it this way, because that's an interesting approach which might open some people's minds in ways that they haven't been opened previously. So, and that can happen really from any direction on the political spectrum. I find, one of the efforts that I make on the radio program that I have now on WVEV is to bring in people from a variety of different perspectives. So I had Guy Page on. He's been a long-time lobbyist for a group that has included the Vermont Yankee nuclear plant, and he's a big fan of nuclear energy and unhappy that the plant closed. A couple of weeks before that, I had on Deborah Katz, who's a Citizens Awareness Network, and you may remember that name as somebody, longtime critic of Vermont Yankee and of the whole nuclear industry. I feel like that's an important thing to do, especially for a small radio station in a rural part of the country where we don't have the luxury in Vermont really of tuning in the liberal commercial radio station or the conservative commercial radio station. I sometimes feel like for the stuff we do, we're pretty much it in a way, and we do need to serve all masters to some extent. And so it's important for us in the media to open ourselves to viewing sources maybe we're not in the habit of. And I think the same goes for news consumers, that if you want to be a well-informed individual, you should read, your magazine selection should include The Nation and The New Republic and maybe National Review and the Weekly Standard, just for some examples. So yeah, get a blend, absolutely.
I have to say, I hate reading news that has a slant. I can't stand MSNBC, I can't stand Fox News, because I just want the news. Just give it to me straight. I don't need the BS, and so I don't know what to tell you all. Nationally, I think it's pretty rough. Unless you're just reading the pages, the straight news from newspapers, but even then, you're not getting all perspectives. I think we've explored in both the panels that, I think that reporters locally and nationally, including Digger, we've done a poor job of really representing what's happening on the ground with real people who are struggling in the state. And that's something we all need to improve on. And but generally speaking, I just think bringing a slant to the story is wrong. I think it clouds the news. You all are smart. You can figure it out.
We'll take questions in about 5 minutes, so sharpen your knives. There is some good news in this. During the last panel, I was looking at one of my favorite news sites, which is run by a group in St. Petersburg, Florida, called the Poynter Institute. an outgrowth of the St. Petersburg Times, and they do a survey every couple of years on trustworthiness in media and at what level of media. And there was actually some good news this year. A survey of 2,000 Americans found that 76% place a great deal or a fair amount of trust in local broadcast news. 20 points higher than national network news. Local papers were at 73%, so right there. You wouldn't know that by some of the commentary that you see on cable each evening. What's next in this evolution, driven by the internet, the exodus of traditional advertising from print? Paula, will 7 Days ever become a daily paper?
No. No desire to be a daily. I mean, we are producing news online every day, but we do not want to print a paper every day. As Anne pointed out, it's expensive. It's a ton of work. We have 15 drivers that go in every direction, but they disappear, which is a good thing.
Do you have more eyeballs on your weekly newspaper or on your website right now?
Right this second?
This week, this month?
Probably the website.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. I mean, actually, this week definitely because of the obituary.
Yeah.
That was an amazing experience.
But one has eclipsed the other.
I'm not sure I can say that definitively, but it is much harder to make money online.
And will BT Digger be around in 25 years?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it depends on what happens with the internet and whether we continue to serve people and get the support that we need to keep going. I'd like to think so. We've been around 10, which is kind of a miracle. 10 as of next year.
In TV and radio, we've always had the luxury of being able to take it for granted that because we have access to your home or your car by virtue of the airwaves, that you're going to have to listen to what we're going to tell you. And that's just not the case anymore, increasingly. And so for both of those media, our ability to be relevant and continue doing what we do means that we're going to have to give you a product that you care to go to on your own, of your own volition, not because it just happens to be streaming on Channel 3 or on 107.9, because fewer and fewer people are going to be getting their information through those channels.
I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but what I didn't know about TV is just how driven it is by the news consumer. There's a whole stable of consultants that visit us from time to time every year to tell us what you all want. And I often roll my eyes and say, no way, that it cannot be what they're asking for. These focus groups must be in like Alaska or something, because this isn't, these aren't, I can't imagine Vermonters want this.
But what do you mean by that? What surprised you?
You really, according to the consultants, you're not interested in depth. You're interested in fast-moving, shorter stories. You want lots of video, quick-moving video.
Crime, apparently.
Crime. You love crime, so nudity. Yeah, I don't know about that. I have not heard that one, but I'll take your word for it. So TV more than anything else is a direct result of what you're asking for, and so you all have the power to shape what you're getting. You may not hear from a focus group, but you can certainly interact with your local TV stations and tell them what you like and what you don't like, and you might just see that reflected in your nightly newscast.
And when the phone rings, assuming you still have a phone at home or on your person, and it's a survey outfit, it may well be from one of our parent companies asking you what you want to see, what you like, what you don't like, who you trust, who you don't. With that, let's open this up to questions. There are microphones at each of these little seats, and you just flick the little switch next to it, pull it out, and let her rip. Who wants to go first? Go right ahead, sir.
My name is Rick Gardner. I'm a former State House reporter, also not from Vermont. Did that for a while.
Can you get a microphone?
There's no
I can't hear you.
Hang on.
Can you hear me now?
Okay. I'm Kirk Gardner, a former State House reporter down in New Jersey years ago. We reportedly referenced constantly here the arrival of that whole new medium of the internet. I observe about that new medium that it's often in that context, the folks who are doing it are trying to promote their market share through the promotion of very aggressive, very adversarial position taking by their reporters or their commentators, involving everything from name calling to judgmental stuff. If we presume that the foundation of a working democracy is a basis of civil discourse, to what degree does that threaten our civil democracy, and to what degree does the new media that you all represent offer an opportunity to get out of that problem?
Yeah, difficult not to hear it, but
Adversarial, to what degree is that successful?
well, I think if you watch cable news, it's widely successful, and you'll keep seeing it because you all keep watching it, and they're getting very good ratings. I don't think you see that sort of adversarial tone at the state level or in what we do. Perhaps you might have some guests, Dave, that come on your show that might not agree with each other, but you certainly aren't going to see reporters from BT Digger or Channel 5 or Channel 3 or VPR sort of engaging in verbal combat very often. You know, sometimes we lob aggressive questions at public officials, but I've never seen it get out of hand or anything like that.
But you all kindly appear on Vermont This Week on Friday night from time to time,
That's right.
for which we're grateful.
That's right. So, you know, I think we do see that sort of adversarial tone at the national level. And again, it's in your hands. You're watching it. You're interacting with the commercials and everything that fund it. So if you don't like it, don't watch it, and it'll go away.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Use the microphone, would you? Flip the switch.
Thanks for taking my question. You spoke earlier about how people tend to listen to one news outlet or another, or maybe a group that are all more or less politically aligned. I would say that that's partly the responsibility of the news associations themselves. I've read that that's part of how you make money, is you identify a target audience and you meet their needs. And I want to point out that WDEV seems to be an organization that tries to meet the needs of both audiences. They have Amy Goodman, for example, and they also have the regular commercial media. And I was wondering if you could address the possibility, maybe Dave, you could speak to this, of having a program where Bill Sayre and Travenlation were on at the same time, and having a little bit of discourse about the issues rather than our being spoon-fed one point of view or the other without any kind of fact-checking from one to the other. Thank you.
I think that's a good idea, and I'm happy to relay that to the management at the station. I do. It is interesting that we have a kind of striped format almost ideologically, in the sense that we have a couple of programs that definitely lean left and a couple of programs that lean right, but they're pretty. I'm sorry. They're pretty dense stripes. I mean, if you want to hear. Pro-free market, conservative, low-tax, small government approach to things, tune in Bill Sayre's show at 11 o'clock in the morning. If you want to hear the, more left perspective, Traven is one, Amy Goodman is another who will provide that for you. My approach, I've said all along when I'm on the radio that I welcome people from all perspectives. I do find that, for whatever reason, the demographics or something, the majority of my callers tend to lean conservative. It's interesting, you know, and it was a little surprising. I've only been doing this since February, but we always hear about how liberal Vermont is and so on. And but there are definitely some more conservative folks out there, and they're not shy about calling a radio talk show. So it's been an interesting experience for me.
They're not shy about writing letters to the editor either, which is great. I'm really proud that we have a mix. I mean, like VPR, we'll never live down the left-leaning reputation of the Vanguard, but it's, you know, I call everybody who writes and engage them, and they seem, it's a real mix, and I love that.
There's this perception that the media are biased. We hear this all the time out there. And, you know, there was a Pew survey a few years ago of reporters nationally, and it found something like 37% of reporters saying that they were liberal by their own inclinations, and 6% of reporters saying that they were conservative. So, you know, some conservatives point to that and they say, there's your proof. There's your proof. What that formula misses, though, is that as journalists, we all get trained all the time, from journalism school right through, you know, daily life in a newsroom, to reflect both sides of the story, to be fair to all comers, to give everybody you can a voice in your story, and I think most of the people I've worked with have valued those things above any desire to get their own opinions into a story. I mean, we're not, you know, certainly all the years I worked at the AP, you leave your opinions at home, and you come to the office and you produce news that is trying to reflect what other people are thinking and other people are saying. And so, you know, to me, the only real bias I've ever sensed in journalism is toward the sensational. I mean, I think, and it bubbles up from the bottom, from reporters. You know, you're a young reporter going to cover your city hall, and the first budget item is $100,000 for new curbs downtown. And you kind of, yeah, that's pretty minor. The second item is $100,000 for new fire hoses for the fire department. And you think to yourself, well, you know, well-equipped fire department could be life or death, so that's a little more interesting. Third item is $100,000 toward the new brothel on Main Street. What's my lead? You know, and so, I mean, sometimes I think we need to curb our sensationalism, or we're going to end up getting hosed. But that's just me.
It wouldn't be a Dave Graham panel without that. Yes, sir. Oh, you flip that on, would you?
What is the journalism, and how do you see it working in the future?
The question was, what is the future of print journalism, and how do you see it working in the future?
I wish I knew. I mean, we're hoping for, you know, backlash. We're hoping all this chaos leads people to maybe rethink, oh, it wasn't such a bad thing when someone was curating the news product and fact-checking it and editing and proofreading it. I mean, we have not seen, there's still the same demand for 7 days as there was, but I mean, the daily newspaper, the daily newspapers, you know, in smaller markets, I'm glad I'm not a publisher of one of those.
I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago and then followed up at another seminar with journalists, and people are saying that daily newspapers will be no longer printing in 4 to 5 years, daily regional papers or metro dailies. That's not the super hyper-local papers. They may well do fine, but people are talking about, you know, the Denver Posts of the world and you know, some of the large metro dailies that have really suffered in the past 15, 20 years, and there doesn't seem to be any sense that that's going away.
In Vermont, we've had a number of small daily newspapers, and we've been lucky to have them. And I started at one at the Bennington Banner, and before I started there, it was a small group, a small chain of 4 or 5 papers, locally owned. And just before I got there, they were bought out by DFM, Digital First Media, which the sort of flagship paper was the Denver Post, and things began to change immediately. Sort of, you bleed out the little guys to feed the beast. In 2008, I went to cover the inauguration or the convention of Barack Obama for the Denver Post because we were now part of that group. And you walk into that newsroom and it's like, it's a different world. I mean, they have the best technology, the best everything, and you start to wonder, like, wow, these guys are stealing my loaf of bread here. And I think that the best thing that could happen in the newspaper world is for those huge media companies to be busted up, return to local or regional coverage so that they stop being bled to feed the big beast. This happened with the Bennington Banner, the Manchester Journal, the Brattleboro Reformer. They're now back to being a smaller regional chain, and by all accounts, they have stabilized and they're doing better. And I think that could be a model for how to sustain small community newspapers in the future if they could just cut loose from these huge media companies.
Very quickly, we have just a minute left, and I want to go behind anybody here. Go ahead.
I'm interested in following up on Alan Gilbert's comment that everyone who posts something on Facebook now is a reporter. So have you, as you're in your publishing ventures, found a way to use that resource in some fashion to sort of help fulfill your mission, but using the resource that exists out there with respect to all the people who are posting stuff on Facebook?
Peter, you have the last word.
The answer is yes. There are actually devices you can use. I'm not terribly familiar with how exactly they work, but some of the people that are more informed about this stuff at VPR have helped me at least understand what they can do. And you can track sort of what are called these hotspots on Twitter. And so I can go on there and know that in central Vermont there is a flurry of social media activity related to something, and then you can dig down and find out what that something is. And to a certain extent, this has become sort of, in days past in the newsroom, you had a scanner, right? So you could hear if anything was happening that was involving local law enforcement or the fire crew. And now we very much scan Facebook and Twitter in a similar way to find out if people in the community are focusing or talking about something that deserves our attention.
Front Porch Forum too here in Vermont. A lot of the local newsrooms are paying attention to Front Porch Forum because it has a lot of times when people are spreading concern in their community about certain issues or whatever, that's the first place it shows up.
Our time is up, but we thank you very much for listening and for your questions.